A couple things. For those of you that I've not met, my name is Ed Donnelly. My wife, Rachel, is back there. We are the owners of Bob Wells Nursery at Surly Farms. Bob Wells was in business for many years down in the Lindell area. He retired back in 2018, and my wife and I purchased the business and moved it up here in 2022. One of the things I would like to start off by saying is we are filming today, so for anybody that's going to watch this later on, especially for those that are out of this area, everything that we're going to talk about today is primarily centered on things you'll encounter here in East Texas, North Texas, zone growing 8. If you're outside that area, things may differ. Also, we're going to talk about some of the very basics when it comes to growing fruit trees. We're not going to get into a religious discussion about one rootstock versus another, or one pruning technique versus another, or organic versus synthetic chemicals for pesticide and fungicide control. We're going to just talk about the basics, make sure everybody's got a level set on things that they need to know before investing in fruit trees, and then we have other classes that we provide that get into more detail about some of these other topics. So let's get started. These are the items that we're going to talk about today on the agenda, just some of the basics. We are going to go through rootstocks. We're going to talk about cross-pollination and what that means. We're going to get into chill hours and cold hardiness and what you need to know about that. Also, some of the things that are going to be required for you to have successful fruit production, along with touching on pruning and some planting. So let's talk for a second about the life cycle of a tree. Most people, when they think about trees, they think about what's growing out there in the woods today. There's a tree growing out there that has dropped a seed or an acorn or some other type of seed pod, and that seed has landed, blown through the wind, landed somewhere else. The conditions are right, and it sprouts up and a new tree comes up out of the ground. Well, with fruit trees, it's a little different. Nothing is grown. In general, fruit trees are not grown from seed. Is there anybody that can tell me why that might be the case? Any idea? Yes, ma'am.
Because the fruit that's on the tree, the seeds don't actually grow the same tree sometimes?
Correct. So if you have a bounty peach tree and a harvest peach tree, the bounty peach tree may have been, the peach that you're harvesting off the bounty tree might have been cross-pollinated with the harvester tree, and now you've got a half harvester, half bounty seed inside of that peach. So when you grow it, it will not be a true bounty nor a true harvester peach. So all the trees are grafted, and most of the trees that we have are done with bud grafts. A tiny piece of a existing bounty peach tree is cut off and grafted into an existing rootstock using what they call a T-graft. And I have an employee who has done this for many years, and this is actually what it looks like right here. So this would be your rootstock. This would be your new graft that is put into the tree. And after about a year and a half, it'll look like this right here. Okay? This bud will take off and grow very quickly, especially the peaches and the plums, because they grow very fast. And we would harvest this tree in December, and it would look very similar to this right here. Maybe a little bit shorter, maybe a little bit taller. It just depends. Okay? All of the trees require some type of pollination. They need pollen to pollinate the flowers on the trees themselves in order to produce fruit. When a tree is growing, you'll see them flower, pretty white flowers, pink flowers, red flowers, it just depends on the tree. That flower is the start of your fruit. That's why when we talk about late freezes killing the flowers, and why we have to be cautious in some of those areas, is because if you kill the flower, then you're going to kill the fruit. After the flower drops off, what you're left with is this right here, which is hard to see. I'll pass this around, but this is the start of an apple right here. This is where the flower was at the top, and right below that is where the apple starts to form. Okay? I'll pass that around in case anybody wants to take a look at that. I'll pass this one around too. There you go. So we'll talk about this a little bit more, but some trees do require cross-pollination, some of them don't with other species, and we'll get into some of those details here in just a minute, okay? So when you come into our store and you're thinking about buying some fruit trees to get started, let's assume for a minute you want to buy some apple trees. There's some basic information that you need to know. We have a chart that we call our pollination chart, and it tells us all the basic information about each tree that you need to know and understand in order to plant some apple trees. The first is going to be, well, what kind is it? The second is, when can I expect fruit off the tree? When is the apple going to ripen? The other is how many chill hours it needs, and we'll talk about that more in a minute. The other is whether or not it is self-fruiting or needs a pollinator. And then what USDA hardiness zones it's good for and what rootstock it's on. And we're going to get into more detail about every single one of these things in a few minutes, but these are basic items that you'll need to know when picking out fruit trees. And we will provide you the guidance that you need in order to pick items that are suited to your area as well. So let's say for a second that you wanted to buy a Molly's Red Delicious apple tree. You're going to get fruit off of it in August. It needs 400 to 500 chill hours. Again, we'll go into that more in a minute. And it needs another variety of apple tree in order for it to produce fruit. Okay? Pollen from one tree has to cross-pollinate to the flower on the other and vice versa in order for them to produce fruit. It's good for zones 5 through 9, and in this case, they're on a rootstock called M111. We'll talk about that more in just a minute, what that means. We have these charts that we consult. We also have them available for you to carry and look at and walk around with as you're picking out trees in case you want to do some of that yourself. We're going to start off with rootstocks first. This tree is a peach tree. And as you can see here at the bottom, it's got a dog leg right here, right? Okay, that dog leg is where that bud graft was grafted onto this rootstock right here. The rootstock is planted from seed. It is generally chosen for certain characteristics, such as it does well in sand or in clay and wet conditions. It may be disease or pest resistant, but it has certain characteristics that rootstock has been bred for over time and has now become some type of an industry standard. The peach is grafted onto that rootstock, and after the peach that we want has grown up big enough, they come in and they cut the rest of the rootstock off, and now you've got a peach tree. Okay? All of what we call stone fruits, peaches, plums, nectarines, and apricots, are generally going to be done on Guardian, Nemagard, Lavelle, or Halford. Guardian is what most of ours are grown on. It's a great rootstock for all the stone fruits. It does well in a multitude of different types of conditions, and it also is certified virus-free, meaning that there's no disease in the tree when you buy it, because sometimes diseases can get into trees even while they're here at the nursery. Nemagard and Lavelle. Nemagard is good in sandy soils because it helps. It has defenses against nematodes. And then the Lavelle is really good in wet soils and clay soils if you live in an area where you've got the black gumbo or the hard red clay. Again, I want to point out that you don't have to have a doctorate in these different types of rootstocks. You come in, you tell us where you live, what your soil's like, and we can guide you on what's the right one to choose. Apples are going to be, most of them are going to be M111, M7, M106, M26. Again, different characteristics. A lot of times, the rootstock is also going to be an indicator of how large or small the tree is going to get. This is a Red Delicious apple. It is a dwarf apple. It is on M7 rootstock. This is a peach tree that is also on dwarf rootstock. They look a little different, don't they? Okay. When we talk about dwarfing, semi-dwarf, standard semi-dwarf, and dwarfing rootstocks, they can mean a lot of different things depending on the tree variety. With peaches, you can get a true dwarf. This tree will never be more than about 6 to 7 feet tall when it's full grown. In 20 years, it will be no taller than I am. When you talk about a dwarf apple tree, a dwarf apple tree is going to probably get to 10 to 12 feet tall. So even a dwarf apple is going to be much larger than a dwarf peach just because of the growth characteristics, okay? Pears are generally on Kelleriana. I'm expecting this to probably change in the next 5 to 10 to 15 years. Kelleriana is also what the Bradford pear is. A lot of states are considering it to be an invasive species now. The cherries, these are the different types here: Mazard, Mihalib, Krimsk. Again, don't get caught up in too much about what each specific one is. When you come into the store, we can help you pick the right one. I did talk already a little bit about the dwarf versus semi-dwarf versus standard. Most standard fruit trees, apples, peaches, plums, pears, they're going to get 20 to 25 feet tall. A semi-standard might be more in the 13 to 15 foot range for an apple, about the same size for a peach. And then again, when we're talking about dwarfs, you can have anywhere from a dwarf peach that's 6 feet tall up to a dwarf apple that's going to be 10 to 12 feet tall. Okay? If you live in a suburban neighborhood where you have a small yard, a lot of times we do recommend, and people are looking for, the dwarfing rootstocks, because you can then get more trees planted in your yard versus having a wide, a few small trees, a few large trees taking up a small space. So I mentioned a minute ago that the peach, plum, nectarine, and apricot are all what we call stone fruits. Something that a lot of people don't realize too is almonds are also a part of that same species or genus. So all of our apple trees are also, all of our almond trees are also grafted onto peach or plum rootstock as well. If you've ever seen an almond pit, it looks very much like a peach pit. Okay, so let's talk about cold hardiness. This is the USDA plant hardiness zone map. The USDA breaks down each zone from 3B down to 10B, and it is an indicator of the lowest average annual temperature that you will experience in your grow zone. So we are in zone 8A if you live in Mineola, Tyler, anywhere surrounding here. If you live a little bit north, you may be 7B or 8B further south. And 8A tells us that in general, on average, our lowest recorded temperature each season is 10 to 15 degrees, which is pretty typical. Okay? Why do we want to know this information? Why is this important? What you can put outside. How much cold can your trees tolerate without dying? Anybody here have a live oak tree that didn't make it through the freeze last February? Yeah, I had about 400. The live oak is better suited towards zones 8B and 9, but over the years we have brought them further north into the northern parts of Texas, and the freeze killed many of them. They cannot handle that type of cold. Same thing with pecans, same thing with all the low chill peaches. So knowing how cold it gets is going to tell us which trees can survive the extreme conditions that we get here when it comes to cold hardiness. Okay, so I mentioned that we're in zone 8A. In general, we get around 800 chill hours each winter. Now, we know that the average temperature here can get down to 10 to 15 degrees, but what do the chill hours mean? What does 800 chill hours mean? It's going to tell us the number of hours below a certain temperature that a tree needs in order to set fruit. So we're in an 800 chill hour zone, and let's assume that I want to plant my bounty peach tree, which is also 800 chill hours. In general, I should expect to have peaches on that tree every year, because the bounty peach tree needs 800 hours of temperatures below 45 degrees in order to set fruit. There's two different ways that chill hours are calculated. One is temperatures below 45. The others are below 45 and above 32, because there are some theories that below 32, it doesn't add value to the chill time. I have no idea which one is correct or not, but in general, if you live around here, If you will assume that 800 chill hours is about right, you should be in pretty good shape. Too low or too high chill hours. If I pick a Florida King peach that might only have 200 chill hours, what that means is that by the end of December, middle of January, I may have already had 200 hours below 45 degrees, and now my Florida King peach thinks, hey, it's time to wake up. It's time to put on flowers. It's time to start producing fruit. Well, what happens when things flower in the middle of January? A freeze comes along and wipes them out, right? So there's a balance between too low and too high a chill hours. In general, where we live in North Texas, we recommend anywhere from about 400 to 900 chill hours. If I have a peach tree that needs 1,200 chill hours, but on average we only get 800 here, then most years I'm not going to get peaches off that tree. I think it was 2015, maybe 2016, where none of the peaches around here, there's a lot of peach orchards around here, none of them produced because we only got about 400 or 500 chill hours that year. It was a very, very warm winter. So you want to be careful not to go too high. You also want to be careful not to go too low. Now, there are exceptions to that. The Anna and the Einsheimer apple only require about 100 to 200 chill hours. But every year, there's apples on those trees out here. And I've got some planted in my yard. And most years, I'm going to get fruit off of them. And one of the reasons is because in general, the apples do tend to flower later on than other fruits or other tree varieties. But there's always exceptions to the rule. In general, though, what you want to be looking for are plants that are between 400 to 900 chill hours. When you walk out there today, I have over 50 different variety of peaches. I've got over 25 different varieties of apples. There are varieties out there that are not suited to our zone. Now, eventually, we plan to be organized enough to where what's out there is suited towards just zone 8. But right now, that's not the case. So if you go out there and you see a Wolf River apple and you think to yourself, well, I don't know what a Wolf River apple is. Let's buy one of those. Not a good idea because it's 1,200 chill hours. So make sure you consult with us and ask us first before you go getting into some other varieties, okay? And the reason why we do that is because we do ship all over the U.S. One of the number one questions we get is, when is my tree going to produce fruit? I'm going to plant this tree this year. When am I going to get results? Okay, peaches, plums, apricots, and nectarines, the stone fruits, generally 1 to 2 seasons. I believe on my peach tree here, I thought the one that I picked out had some fruit setting on it, but there's a lot of peaches out there that are 1.5 to 2 years old that already have small peaches on them this season. Okay, if you plant a peach tree this year, you will likely get a couple of peaches off of it. Next year is when you should start to see more fruit appearing, and then each year it will add to that over time. Okay. Apples and pears are going to be a little different. They're going to take a little bit longer. Generally 2 to 4 seasons before you really start getting some fruit production off of those. Our apple trees that we have planted at our house took about 3 years before we really started to get a fair amount of apples off of them. They're just a little slower. The fig trees, you'll probably get fruit off of them this season if you plant one today. Matter of fact, if you go out there right now, a lot of the fig trees are probably already setting fruit, and they're in a 5-gallon container. Most berries are going to produce either this year or next year. If you go out to where the blueberries are, you'll see that they are covered in blueberries right now. Okay, now that's the 3-gallon size. In the 1-gallon size, you may see a few berries on them, but the blueberries in the 3-gallon are loaded. The blackberries will also produce a handful of blackberries this year. Next year is when you'll really start seeing more production, though. Okay, pecan and nut trees. Got to have a little bit of patience. Pecans take a long time. Most of the nut trees take a long time, anywhere from 7 to 15 years, and that can vary significantly. We oftentimes get questions of, well, do you have a pecan tree that's, 5 years old, 7 years old? In some cases, we do have some older if you want to get a little bit of a head start, but most of our trees are going to be about 2 to 4 years old. Like I always tell everybody, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. Citrus, 1 to 2 seasons. If you go into the greenhouse, You can already see that some of the lemons and limes are setting fruit right now. Those trees are 1.5 to 2 years old. You'll get a handful of fruit off of them next year. With our lemon tree that my wife planted several years ago, the first year, we got 5 or 10. The next year, we got 15 or 20. And by the third or fourth season, we were getting 50 or more lemons off that tree every single year. Avocados are another one that's a little slower to start. They're going to generally be 2 to 4 seasons as well. Although, we do have some pecans in this greenhouse here that are approximately 2 to 3 years old, and they actually did set fruit for the first time. It's the first time we've had them in the nursery where they set fruit. It was pretty neat. Okay, successful fruit production. The bare minimums are soil, sunshine, and water. You got to have those things. But there's a lot of other factors that can go into whether or not you're going to have a successful crop or not. People always ask me, can I plant my fruit trees in shade? You can. Okay? You can do whatever you want. If you want good fruit production, you need full sun. Whether it's a blueberry, a blackberry, an apple, a peach, a pear, plum, it doesn't matter. You need full sun. Okay? There are exceptions to that rule. Generally, cherries and raspberries, especially where we live in Texas, that it gets a little too hot here and the sun gets a little bit too intense. And if you can give them some afternoon shade, they will do better. Another thing that you may have heard of is thinning out your trees. A lot of people will recommend, and I think it's a good idea, that when the tree is young, especially the first season, go ahead and take the fruit off of it. The sun receives its energy, the plant receives its energy from the sun, and that tree is going to use that energy to grow roots, leaves, produce the fruit, everything that it needs to do. If you give it the time in the first season to really put the energy into root production and getting established, you generally get a better harvest the second year. Another thing that you'll probably need to do after a couple years, particularly with the stone fruits, is you'll have to go through and cull or thin. And you'll see where you'll get clusters of 2, 3, or 4 peaches all clustered together. And you need to go through and take about half those fruits off when they're small. Again, the plant is only going to get so much energy from the sun in a year and try to ripen up 500 peaches on your tree or 300 peaches on your tree. So you can either get 500 mediocre peaches on the tree, or you can cull back to 300 and get 300 fantastic peaches on your tree. So once your tree starts getting to the point where it's producing a lot of peaches, you need to go through and start culling. Pruning. There are some specific ways that the trees need to be pruned. The one that I would suggest is probably the most important to prune right from the very beginning is going to be peach trees, and I'm going to show you how to do that here in just a few minutes. There's endless number of videos online about pruning trees. If you're concerned about any of those or want to know more, go check them out. Dave Wilson Nursery in California is a great resource for backyard orchard culture and pruning the fruit trees as well. Dave Wilson Nursery. Your soil pH can make a big difference. In general, fruit-bearing plants like slightly acidic soil. If you are in an area that has high clay content, you're going to be a little more alkaline. The fruit trees will probably do just fine there, but some things like blackberries and blueberries will not do well there at all. They cannot tolerate the heavy, wet clay soils that's alkaline. If you want to get blackberries or blueberries off your plants and you live where you have clay, you need to do some soil amendment or do some raised beds. If you want to find out what kind of pH you have in your soil, you can work with your local county extension agent to help you. They'll give you a sample kit. They'll send it off. You send it off, get the results back. But we run into different issues with different soil types. Clay holds water. It's very hard. Peaches, plums, nectarines, they don't like to be standing in water. They don't like wet feet. They're going to get root rot right away, and they're going to die. Sandy soil, especially if you live like down in Lindale where you may have sugar sand, there's no nutrition in that soil whatsoever. So you are going to have to provide extra nutrients to that tree in order to get it to grow well. So just kind of knowing a little bit about what you have where you live will help you decide what things you need to do to help improve the growing conditions. I just mentioned the wet versus dry soil. I know here where we live, it can get very dry for very long periods and very hot, and the soil can dry out very quickly. If you have clay soils, you don't have that problem, but again, with clay soils, it can get too wet for certain species. So one of my favorite questions is, how many gallons of water does my tree need per week? Well, there's only one person who knows the answer to that question, and he's not talking. That's like you asking me, how many calories of food do I need to eat every single day? Well, that depends. Are you 4 years old or are you 40? Do you exercise every single day, or do you sit at home and relax most times? Are you male or female? Are you on a diet or not? Are you trying to gain weight? There's no set number of calories that I can tell you that's perfect for you, because you're an individual and you're different from everybody else. Same with water for fruit trees. The conditions are going to dictate how much water your trees need. You need to actively participate in the growing of your trees and look at them and see how they're doing to determine whether or not they need more water. The things that can make a difference, just one second, ma'am, are we in the middle of winter or are we in the middle of summer? If we're in the middle of winter and your tree's a year old, it probably doesn't need any water at all. It's dormant. It's getting rain every few weeks. If it's in the middle of the summer, you better be watering it fairly heavily if it's a young tree. Do you have clay soil? Do you have sand? Are you in a spot that drains well or holds water? There's all sorts of different things that go into how much water your tree needs. And if you'll simply take your finger, stick it in the dirt, feel if there's moisture, look at the leaves, see if they're drooping or turning yellow, those are good indicators of whether or not that plant needs more water. Your raised beds, in general, I don't recommend necessarily planting fruit trees in raised beds, because they've got to be fairly large for the root system to spread out. But with like blackberries and blueberries, they don't have to be very big at all. You can plant blackberries in a container like this and get blackberries off of it every single year. Okay? So, yeah, it can be. And so in those cases, there's other things you can do. And the number one thing that I would start doing is putting down organic matter right now. Even if you don't want to plant until next year or the year after, start putting organic matter into the soil now, and it will start helping that soil to loosen up. Okay? Fertilization. And when I say fertilization, I don't necessarily mean going out and buying some triple 13 and putting it out there. You can certainly do that. And again, I'm not going to get into an argument whether you should use synthetic fertilizers or organic fertilizers. Use whatever you want that you feel comfortable with. But fertilizing your trees is a very good idea. Providing other sources of nutrition like compost, dried molasses, other things that stimulate biological activity in the soil are very, very good for your trees. Okay? And it also helps as the compost improves the soil quality, it will actually hold water better as well. The right amount of water. It keeps it moist longer than just if you had sand out there. And it'll also keep the water from just running off if you've got clay. Just hitting the ground and running off. Pest and disease management. We're blessed in East Texas that it gets hot, humid, and we have a lot of bugs. The perfect trifecta. Who could not want more? Right? You're going to have problems with disease and pest if you live around here. It's a given. You're going to have to, the second main area, in addition to watering, that you're going to need to make sure you pay attention to your trees is on pest and disease management. If you have the stone fruits, peach, plum, nectarine, apricot, you're going to have to be diligent from the time you see those buds come out till the time the fruit comes off that tree to make sure that you're spraying them. Apples and pears, not so much. Some other trees like jujubes, we don't touch ours at all. They don't need anything. Nothing bothers them. pomegranates, persimmons, rarely does anything bother them either. But certain fruit trees, you're going to have to be diligent. There's a number of different products: orange oil, horticultural oils, neem, Monterey, copper fungicide, you name it. We can give you information on all those at a different time. If you want to use any of them here, or you want to buy them at your local hardware store or get them online, you can, but you need to do it, and you need to get yourself a little 2-gallon sprayer and make sure you're out there every few weeks. Okay, pruning. We did a seminar strictly on pruning earlier this season. I do believe it's going to be online if you want to go back and watch it. But the one that we're going to talk about specifically and briefly today is about peach trees, because peach trees really need to be pruned early on in a certain manner in order to produce, in order to improve production over the life of the tree. What you're going to want to do is you're going to want to come in and cut out the middle of that tree, because the peach tree needs to grow out this direction and not just straight up. When the tree is growing out in a bowl or vase shaped, it allows the sun to get in and ripen the peaches in the middle. It allows for some airflow to get in there and keep it from just being hot and humid in there all the time. And you're going to have 3 to 4, maybe 5 main branches on that tree going out this direction. So I brought this tree in here. Let me get this up here on the table real quick. This tree had some suckers on the bottom. I've already taken them off. If this was a tree that you were going to buy and take home, I would recommend you make a pruning cut in one of 2 places. And if you buy one today, you may want to wait till the fall. It's not imperative that you have to do it today, but in general, when you do have to prune the peach trees. I'm going to either prune this tree about right here or right here, depending on how I feel about my branching structure. And you'd be amazed at how many times I do that, and people just go, "Oh, you just killed that tree." No, I'm improving the structure of the tree to produce peaches for the life of the tree. If you ever go to a peach orchard, you'll notice when they plant their trees, they want about a 2-foot whip, straight up and down, and they just cut the top of it right off. And why do they do that? They want to get that branching going this way. They also want their peaches low to the ground because it's easier to harvest that way. So now I've got my tree pruned. Next winter, after the tree has matured, I'm going to take the top 3, 4, maybe 5 branches at the most of the strongest branches heading out in different directions that aren't competing for space with each other, and take the rest off. And those will be my main branches on the tree for the life of the tree. Okay? I'd also come in here and take off these little suckers down here because we don't need those. And there you go. This will be a beautifully shaped tree in 2 or 3 years. And there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe 7 branches here. And again, I'm going to take off 2, 3, or 4 of those, and I'm going to pick one going this direction, out here, and I'm going to end up with 3 or 4 main branches. Okay. Again, there's a ton of resources online. Also, we have our pruning class that you can go back and take a look at if you have specific questions about pruning. Okay, planting. My wife and I moved out here from Frisco, and in every single new house that's built, there's 2 trees in the front yard. City requires it. You got to have 2 trees in the front yard. Most of them, when you move in, look just like this. All nice and pretty, a few rocks around it, some mulch. Looks great, right? Okay. There's a big problem there, and that is that you have covered up this part of the tree right here known as the root flare. And we're going to talk more about the root flare in just a minute, but this is a huge mistake that people make. And the second is planting the tree too deep. After we get done in here, we're going to go outside and we're going to plant a tree, and I'm going to kind of show you how we do it. The other thing I want to make sure that you realize is you can go online and you can get information about how to plant a tree, and you're going to get a lot of different opinions. What I'm going to tell you is the way we do it, and how we do it is where we get success. There's plenty of other opinions out there, and if you want to follow any of them, great. Feel free to. First thing is dig the hole nice and wide and deep, generally about 2 times the size of the container. Now you've got a deep hole about this deep. What we want to prevent is putting the tree into the hole and then having the roots go out, hit the edge of the hole, and start circling around. So we generally recommend scoring the sides of the hole and the bottom of the hole so that if a root goes out and it starts going this way, it's going to get redirected by something else there and start going off in a different direction rather than just around the hole. Some schools of thought say just plant it right in the soil you have. We generally recommend mixing in about 25% compost just to provide some additional nutrition to the soil and help get that biological activity stimulated. What you're going to want to do is, you've got your nice deep hole. You're going to want to fill that hole up about halfway with your soil compost mix and flood it with water. And I'm talking about mud pie wet. Very, very wet. Get all the air pockets out of it. Make sure it's soaked, and it's going to be a nice wet area for those roots to go into when they're exposed after pulling them out of the container. What you'll start doing then is you'll place the tree in the hole and start backfilling with more dirt around the tree and more water, and keeping it very, very wet around the tree as you go. Eventually, you'll have the hole filled, and it'll look like this. Now, a couple things to keep in mind. Of the 2 major mistakes, covering the root flare, the other is planting the tree too deep. I would rather plant a tree 2 or 3 inches too shallow than an inch or two too deep, because when you plant it deep, again, you're going to cover that root flare, and it's going to cause long-term health issues. At a bare minimum, never cover the graft up. We don't recommend that. I say never. There's a couple of exceptions, but in general, any of the fruit trees you're going to buy here do not cover the graft. This is a picture that I stole from Howard Garrett. His website is dirtdoctor.com. He's great when it comes to organic practices for gardening and planting trees. You'll notice on here, he's put the root ball on the bottom of the hole, which you can certainly do. We do recommend digging a little deeper, but you'll also notice that the tree is slightly above the grade of the rest of the ground. Again, he doesn't want to plant that tree too deep. You're also going to get some settling with that tree over time, so plant it a little shallow, not too deep. Another thing that you'll see that he recommends goes back to the root flare. There's very little, if any, mulch or compost right here next to the tree, and it gets thicker as we go out. Okay? The mulch is really good for helping with the biological activity and also helping to hold in the water during the summertime, but you can't get it real deep here around the root flare. We're just about done here, but I wanted to show a couple of pictures and examples of the root flare. When my wife and I bought our house here in 2014, we've got some large pecan trees. One of them in the backyard, you can kind of see right here a difference in the bark, and that's because there was soil and sand all the way up over a foot high on the pecan tree. It looked like this right here. And so I went in and pulled out yards and yards and yards of dirt around that tree to expose this root flare here, which is going to make the tree a lot healthier in the long term. This is another picture here. Again, you can see this line here. It was all covered with dirt. And then this is a cedar tree that was in our yard. And you can also see the difference in coloration here on this line of the bottom of the trunk that was covered with soil versus above it that was exposed. This is a really big problem with trees for the long-term health. Keep an eye on it. If you've got trees in your yard that are already planted, it's not too late to go in and take off some of that additional soil. Okay? When I plant this tree, I will usually remove the top little bit of soil until I know I've gotten to the roots. Okay? People always ask me, well, if the tree is planted this deep, won't it just start growing new roots? In some cases, it will grow some little hair roots, but they're no good for the tree. Bark on the tree, the trunk, cannot turn into roots, but roots can turn into bark. And what I mean by that is if the roots are exposed, they will bark over time and heal themselves, and they'll be just fine. And it's okay if they're exposed, but you will never get enough root growth off the trunk of a tree to make it warrant being below grade. Yes, ma'am. Generally, what happens is either you're going to get fungal issues, a disease, or it's going to be an entry point for pests to get in because the bark is going to rot, and it's going to be an entry point for pests to get in there. You can move outside, and we'll do the planting demonstration here in a couple of minutes. We've got our hole dug. Michael, let's go ahead and start backfilling with the soil compost mixture. One other thing I would caution you, especially this time of year, the water in the hose is going to get real hot. Let it run until it's cool. Otherwise, you can burn the roots on the tree. So we're going to start backfilling this here. Again, get it about halfway and get it really, really nice and wet. Yes, it's already been mixed. That's good for now. Something else that I'm going to throw in here. Again, we like to follow the practices that Howard Garrett has. He's an excellent organic gardener, and some of the beneficial things that he puts in when he's planting and does are things like the dried molasses, lava sand, a whole lot of other things. We don't carry all those, but I do have some of the dried molasses here, and I'm going to take that and put some of that in the hole as well. What's that? Yeah, pretty much. But this is great for stimulating the biological activity in the soil, which is what your plants need in order to grow healthily. Okay. It does not. It's strictly to get the microbes in the soil that are there to create healthy soil, prevent, it also helps bring in the beneficial insects, and also can help the beneficial bacterial and fungi to grow that you need in the soil in order to create healthy growing conditions. Okay, so we've got our tree, we've pulled it out of the container. It's got a nice healthy root system. A couple things I'm going to do. I'm just going to double check on this tree here and see where my roots start. You can see roots here, just like that. So I didn't have to take off a whole lot, just a little bit here. But you can see that we definitely have the graft point well above the soil line, so that's not a problem. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my pocket knife here, and I'm going to cut down through these roots. I'm going to break them up, cause them to separate, and this is going to give me a growth spurt of the roots to cause them to want to go out and develop new roots. Okay, that's pretty good. Sometimes on the bottom, you'll see this, sometimes you'll see a little bit of spiraling around on the bottom of the container. Cut those babies off. All right, we're going to put it in the hole and start backfilling with water and soil. Okay, now a couple things to keep in mind. I like my trees planted straight, so I always try to make sure they're sticking straight up. Right now, this tree is, we have a little bit of an unusual situation going on here because I've got a good 6 inches worth of tree mulch that's been on the ground. So our soil line is actually a little bit deeper, but I still think that this tree is going to be a little bit too deep. So I'm going to pull it up a little bit. There we go. Now you'll notice the top of the root ball is above the adjoining soil here. So even if I get a little bit of settling, which I probably will, the tree's not going to be too deep. I'll come back with a little bit of organic fertilizer. Again, about that much. Sprinkle it around. Maybe put a little more of my compost out there. And then the last thing that I would do is I would take my wood chips and pine bark mulch or some kind of mulch, start off again really thin here around the base and kind of work my way out and get thicker as I go out. During the summertime, that's going to be really beneficial in helping keep the soil in this area moist. Again, we're really focusing on East Texas and the conditions we have out here. The first summer, it's going to get hot, it's going to get dry. You're going to probably want to water these trees heavily once or twice a week. It's better to water the tree heavily, a lot at one time, than a little bit each day. If you have a irrigation system and you think, oh, well, my sprinklers run for 15 minutes a day every day, not going to be good enough. You got to get those roots down there wet.
Somebody available to grab a couple trees from the back for a customer?
Go ahead. So what I generally recommend is taking the hose, turning it on, letting it run for 10 or 15 minutes, or if you've got an irrigation system, letting it run for a while and really get nice and wet, then let it sit for a few days and start to dry out. You want those roots going out and exploring for water, but you don't want them to get dried out. Okay? On a new tree, I would not rely on my irrigation system. I would take my hose and leave it there for 15 minutes. Okay? And again, that goes back to how much water do my trees need. It is going to depend on a lot of things. What kind of soil you have, what kind of irrigation system you have, how old is the tree, all those different factors. Pay attention to the tree, watch the tree. You'll see on like this peach tree here, if it was suffering, by the way, we planted this tree this year and it's got peaches on it. If this tree was suffering, we would see the leaves turning yellow, we'd see them drooping, and that's a telltale sign. All I gotta do is stick my hand down in here, and about 3 inches down, I can feel it getting moist. Okay? All right? You're welcome. Thank you for coming. I really appreciate you coming out.